The grind continues. It's episode 26 of For Our Edification. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me on part two of this great conversation with Joel Goodman, the CEO of Bravery Media and co-host of the Thought Feeder podcast. The views and opinions expressed on For Our Edification do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the hosts, guests, or any entities with which we are affiliated. That last answer, okay, so you gave me a lot to chew on there. Is it fair though? Let me ask you this: is it fair to say, okay, this is our strategic plan? Because I've been in this spot before where I've said, hey, this is our strategic plan as an institution. Let's talk about what we want the website to do based on our strategic plan. And of course, you don't sink 100% of your website strategy into that.
Sure.
But you at least know that if your goal is to say, if fundraising is a major part of your strategic plan, you know that at least you want to do something with the website that's going to angle you a little bit, give you more of an advantage in fundraising, knowing that you do want students. If part of your strategy, if part of your strategic plan is we want to make sure that we have a tighter pipeline for our accounting, majors to the big accounting firms.
Sure.
You at least want to, or at least we want to make sure we have tighter pipelines to our employers, our employment partners. You at least know that you want to do something with the website that's going to angle it in that direction. And that does kind of ward off some of the internal politics of, the quantum physics professor just got this $2 million grant and he is standing in the door of the office going, you better put this on the homepage of the website. I want a link on the homepage of the website. So is it fair to say if you look at your strategic plan, that could guide you in a direction to make your website that's something more usable and actually makes a little bit more sense?
I think yes. The part there that's difficult is that you still need staff that is thinking strategically about how the website can do that, because traditional, that knowledge competition thing again, like the traditional mindset is like, well, yeah, we need to do fundraising, so let's put a big old appeal on the homepage. Let's change out the hero image and let's put a big old floating box. It's like give now, give now. But what you're not thinking about is, are you trying to gain more fundraising from the homepage at the expense of your other goals like enrollment? And so most institutions can't afford to have a fundraising campaign go, but then also lose enrollment, right? You're trying to maintain the enrollment figure while increasing the fundraising dollars. And when a prospective student lands on your homepage and just sees a bunch of give messaging, they're thinking, oh, this school is insolvent. They are not going to be around long enough. Can I trust them to stick around? Because it looks like they're hard up for cash. Like something must be going on, right? Prospective students don't think like we do on the back end. They know nothing about our structures. They know nothing about our org chart. They know nothing about how money is raised and how money is spent within the institution.
And to some degree, they don't care.
And to some degree, they don't care until it feels like something negative, right? Until they actually see it. And so if those things like undermining your enrollment and marketing messaging with fundraising stuff, or with a bunch of news stories that people don't care about, or the idea, the quantum physics professor needing a link on it, like it's not necessarily a bad thing, but are you then saying to the 99% of prospective students hitting your website that don't care about quantum physics and don't want to go into that program that you don't offer anything to them? Are they like looking at your website and saying like, well, this isn't relevant to me, so I'm like, this is obviously not the place I want to be? There are so many marketing realizations that we have to balance and figure out what that mix is. And the challenge is, as you have experienced and as I have experienced, as I'm sure countless other higher ed marketing pros have experienced, is that eventually you get worn down, and someone's saying like, do this, and you're like, well, you haven't listened to me before, so I might as well just do this and not get into a fight. And Eddie, honestly, that's why I started my agency. Was the last institution I was at, I was so tired of fighting for every little obvious thing that needed to happen on the web.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to have the weeks long conversation anymore about why this is the thing we needed to do. Like, it should be obvious. You should be trusting your web strategy people, your web marketers, because they know what's going on. And so, on the flip side, what can you do with the website to help the fundraising thing? Well, here's the thing with fundraising. A lot of this I've learned from my friend Ashley Budd, who works at Cornell. I spent a little bit of time in advancement early in my career. The homepage of the website is not where people go to find out how to give to your school or to learn about how to give to your school. In fact, alumni don't generally go to the homepage of your website unless you are sending them an email or a text message with a link to that homepage. That's not what's in their head on a day-to-day basis. They have lives that do not revolve around your institution. And so the strategy isn't, if we put it on the website, they will come. They don't care. They're not looking for it. They're not paying attention. It's if you reach out to them with an email or a text message or however that one-on-one communication is, and drive them to the thing you want to drive them to, they will come to it. And a lot of times that shouldn't be your homepage. That should be a custom. It should be, within your alumni site or your alumni giving portal or whatever it is that you use for fundraising. And it should be optimized for giving conversion rates, not optimized for enrollment management conversion rates, not optimized for, all these other things that you need to do to support other financial areas of the institution. And that's the thing. Everyone with their infinite knowledge of what website strategy needs to be when they aren't website marketing people think that the homepage is the most important thing for everything. But if the homepage is trying to address everyone, it doesn't address anyone. It's not, it's just watering down every message and is ineffective in general. And that's the thing that needs to be realized. It's a lack of trust, or it's an overcompensation of ego, and I don't know which one it is. But like, if your leadership isn't trusting the people in the Marcom office to do the jobs that they need to do to achieve the goals that the institution has, then your marketing office is never going to be as effective as it could be, and those people are just going to get frustrated and burnt out and eventually leave because they're not being listened to. They're not being able to do their actual job. They're just pulling, they're just doing what someone else has told them to do that doesn't know as much as them. And that's a frustrating place.
Brutally honest question here. Is that what happened to you? Did you burn out?
I think yes. Well, I don't know. I was young, so I feel like I had a little bit more of a tether on how, like, the fuse was a lot longer, and I don't know that I completely got to the burnout phase. I had finished a master's degree, and I think I was burned out on the place that I was. I felt like I had done everything that I could do, and I was just tired of fighting, and I wanted to work on more projects than just one that took me, I built 8 websites in 6 months, pretty much on my own. Yeah, it's ridiculous. While in grad school, and I was tired. I was so tired. And, and it was like, I finished sometime before like a couple months before Thanksgiving. And like, the one thing that I remember is my wife and I were going to drive to her folks for Thanksgiving. And I remember I was packing up my stuff, like getting ready to go home so we could get ahead of some weather. And my boss called me in the office and said, I noticed that you've only been working 40 hours a week, and on salary, like that's just like the starting point. And I was like, excuse me, do you know how many hours I put in for 8 months straight or 6 months straight while I was building these websites for you? Like, no.
Wow.
You don't pay me enough to be in the office more than 40 hours a week. And the benefits definitely weren't good enough to be in the office for more than 40 hours a week.
Wow. Wow.
And I was the only web person, like it was, and it was a big institution. So I think it was, it probably was burnout. I don't think I realized it at the time.
Yeah.
But you know, the solution was moving away from Chicago to Austin, Texas, and starting an agency. So yeah, maybe it was burnout.
Well, I mean, but that and this is something I've been reading up on because I'm a member of American Marketing Association,
Yeah,
and so the higher ed marketers who are in AMA, we have had a constant conversation going
yeah,
about this, and so it's gotten to a point where I'm like, well, let me read about this because we keep talking about it, and I would say that burnout is something that kind of creeps up on you. You
mm,
don't necessarily realize you're checking all the boxes from what I'm reading. And so it makes sense. It makes sense that that you would say that. I'm not exactly sure if that was the thing,
yeah,
but I mean, I think what people and I always tell people this. This is one of the difficulties of higher ed marketing, and I know for anybody who's listening that's just like, man, he keeps talking about how difficult the job is. And the reason I keep talking about how difficult the job is because people don't think the job is difficult. They actually
right.
think it's a very easy job.
Yep.
And they really think that what we're doing is we're sitting around throwing pencils up in the ceiling all day, coming up with really, wacky ideas and doing some nice, pretty stuff. But when a team of people realizes that they have to be much more strategic than they are,
Yeah.
then we're all using so much more brain power, and we are all working so much harder to collaborate and not only collaborate within the team, but we're working harder to collaborate throughout campus. And one thing that I keep saying, and I'm going to die on this hill, I've heard so many people say, well, if colleges ran more like a business, then blah, blah, blah. You don't actually need colleges to run like a business. You need them to run more like a very efficient city. That's
Yeah.
what you really need, because we're cities within cities. And what you have to figure out, though, what does the efficient city model look like?
Right.
And that's not all that easy because honestly, your students are your citizens and they're kind of an uncontrolled group. And so, so when people say just run it like a business, you have to account for this group of people who are within the walls of your business, who are not being paid by the business. They're actually something that's actually helping your business run.
Right.
And so I think that's what I think that's what makes it such a complicated job. And I think when people come in and they just have these visions of creating really cool logos, and they have these visions of just doing really cool stuff on a website, and they're going to grab the student influencers and get the student influencers, and they do not know how uncooperative students can be.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, or unreliable in cases. When they're not ready for that, I think that's when the job in higher ed marketing and on the communication
Yeah.
side becomes a very difficult job, when you just don't see all of that coming, or when you have people coming in at the leadership levels, and they're the ones who are thinking, oh, this is really easy. Why don't you just tell your webmaster to go ahead and update these next 500 pages by next week?
Right.
But
Right.
they don't realize that's what they're asking for. The way they're asking a question is, why aren't the pages updated?
Well, yeah, and on antiquated software that
Yeah,
was purchased 10 years ago and hasn't really been updated, and with a person that isn't necessarily an expert at that content management system or that
yeah,
process, and and that's different everywhere, but there's that modernization part that makes everything harder. It decreases that efficiency of your city. And then to add on to that, Eddie, I think one of the one of the things that makes higher ed marketing really hard is that you're managing the reputation of a giant organization that's supposed to be doing public good,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I think outside of marketing, people chalk that up to your PR agency that's on retainer in case something bad happens, but they're the people that are doing the everyday stuff. And one of the episodes that we had on Thought Feeder that stuck with me was with our friend Ella Dawson, who she used to run social media for TED Talks.
yeah,
And this was one fairly early in the series where we really dug into the pressures and stresses that go on to especially the social media side of marketers in higher ed. And those are the things people don't realize. So, the folks on the front lines that are on social media that are, dealing with the communities and figuring out where the communities are, like they're getting the brunt of all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
And so, when you're in a marketing position and all you're hearing is negative, 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 that contributes to a lot of mental stress. And it's overall like can definitely affect your health. And we saw that a lot during the pandemic. That was one of those common themes that we tried to talk about a bit on the podcast. And we heard a lot from the community and folks that we knew around higher ed marketing and especially higher ed social. And it's one of those things that they're not paid enough to deal with everyone's trauma, and be traumatized themselves by everyone's trauma. And they're not recognized nearly enough for that kind of stress and that kind of work that happens. And that's frustrating. And I think it expands in other ways to the rest of the Marcom team. It's the folks that are having to do the PR stuff. It's the folks that are having to make sure that, there aren't side conversations, negative conversations happening about your institution. They're the ones that have to, make sure that the random thing that was funny but may not look good on the, or reflect well on the institution that some student did last weekend is something that that's taken care of. And it's a big job. It's a really big job, and it's not an easy job because, as you said, like when you're managing a bunch of citizens and a kind of uncontrolled, unreliable population, like there are surprises every single day, and those get in the way of the rest of the work that you have to do as marketer. And so there's never enough time, there's never enough money, there's never enough staffing, and it makes the job extremely difficult.
A couple of times in previous answers, you mentioned ego. Did any of the guests on Thought Feeder indicate or imply at any point that they felt that ego made their jobs difficult?
Yes, I think more on the imply. I don't think anyone was explicit in saying that, except maybe me, because I've talked about that for a long time. But I'm outside of higher. I mean, kind of. I'm not on a campus right now, so I think it came up in subtler ways. I mean, that's one of those things that like the mug we sent you, like I think that's one of the ones people shied away from saying that they shouldn't say. I
probably said something I shouldn't have on Thought Feeder.
Yeah. JS came up with that, and I was like, that's very good, JS. It's perfect.
Perfect. I was gonna say it's perfect, actually. Yeah.
And so I think the ego thing came into play, and it's a lot of the job is relationship management, internally and externally, but definitely internally. And I remember my first institutional job was actually, even when I was a student working, when I was in undergrad, we had a student run music festival, and a big part of my job when I was director of the music festival was just managing administrative relationships, making sure they weren't
really.
Oh yeah, it was a big learning experience, but it was it was making sure the VP of student affairs, the actually senior VP of student affairs was was happy and understood what was going on and felt appreciated in what we were doing. And it was making sure that none of the administrative flack came back on our staff, because it was all student run. We were 50 students putting on a 3-day music festival. And
wow.
It was an interesting role to play. And then I eventually worked at that institution, and so it paid off. But then when I moved to the last institutional job that I had, it was full force. Okay, I had to build bridges between marketing and IT, because I needed that relationship in place. I needed to build relationships with enrollment management because the walling off and siloing stuff that was going on. But I also needed to make sure that I had enough political capital or relational capital invested, that when I needed to mouth off about something because it needed to get done, that I wasn't going to get in too much trouble. And it was very strategic, but a lot of that was ego play. It was making sure that people felt like they were involved. I mean, honestly, in the work that I do now, Eddie, like it's a lot of times it's, you think about when you go into like a website discovery process, right? Like you want to go in and figure out like, what do we need to do for this website? A big part of that is every institution wants everyone on campus to be involved. Not literally, but they want, like, you end up with a committee of like 25 people sometimes that
We need to put together a committee, an interest committee, and da 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 da.
all these people that think they're experts on the website need to be involved in the committee, right?
And then my favorite one is, hold on, is someone from athletics on this? Is somebody? Nobody from student affairs is on this. Wait a minute, is
Right.
somebody from? Yeah.
And so you got someone from, like, people from everywhere, and that, like, that's, I was about to say that's fine. It's not fine, but there are ways to deal with it. And a big part of that, they should not all be on there. But the way that we deal with that is it's listening. Like, we go in, we listen to what they need to do. We make sure we communicate back to them. And a lot of times they don't want to be part of the process. They just want their voice heard, or they want to feel like their voice has been heard. And so we make sure we hear their voice. If it's not going to work, we say, like, we make something up, like we'll say, like, we've taken that into account. We're focusing on these goals. We're going to see how we can work this in, but it might be something that we need to do further down the line after we can do some testing and things like that. But, you find ways to make sure that people have the feeling of being involved, have the feeling of being heard and listened in the process of doing a website redesign, for instance. And then, I don't want to say completely disregard what they asked for, but sometimes you do. You're not going to use what they had. But you want to make sure that they're not upset when they find out that their ideas aren't going to be used. Because not everyone is a web marketer, not everyone is a social media marketer, not everyone is a traditional marketer, and the people that are in those roles shouldn't be just executing on what other people think they know, but don't actually, especially because they don't have all the information that marketers have.
Yeah. So how did the interviews that you conducted on Thought Feeder, how did that inform the work that you do now and how you work with campus partners?
Yeah, I think it has helped me kind of double down on a lot of the things. I mean, I'm a very confident person. I don't know if you can tell that through this, but I've been called arrogant. I like to refer to it as confidence. I don't think I'm very arrogant, but I do make decisions based on a lot of research and a lot of data. And so, like, I think the interviews that we had were like anecdotal research that I was doing for a lot of the work that we do. And so what I've always kind of tried to do as an agency, as an agency owner, as someone that comes in as a campus partner, is support the really smart people in the marketing office and raise their profile up. And common refrain over the last decade plus of working in this industry, especially among web marketers, is that you had the exact same idea as the consultant that came in and like told them what to do, right?
Yeah.
Somehow leadership feels better about a consultant, paying a consultant to come in and tell them what to do, even when their staff like could be doing that job themselves. They could have been the consultant if they had chosen a different path, right? And so a lot of times I come in and I want to listen to the folks that are doing the everyday job and figure out, okay, what are your goals? What do you see as the challenges? Can we help make that better for you as we put processes in place? Because a lot of times it's just a lack of governance, or it's a lack of communication channels with leadership. And so my team and we really try to make sure that the people that we're interfacing with every day aren't just getting something that's going to look good for their boss, but it's something that's going to be sustainable for them, that's hopefully going to make their jobs easier, and is going to elevate the ideas and thoughts and strategies that they have, because they know more than we do about the audiences, right? They know who the market is for that institution. We're going to learn that, but we're going to learn that through them. So why not try to elevate them up and make sure that their ideas are, one, attributed to them. Even if we say, like, hey, you should do this, we'll put in the report that we give them, like, this is something that your staff has been saying and you should listen to them, because they know what they're talking about. And yeah, just the conversations that we had on Thought Feeder reinforced I don't don't want to say reinforced level of intelligence. I knew that was there. Like, all the people we had on are super smart. And we knew they were super smart, but it's trying to amplify those voices a little bit more, because they're we want to prevent burnout for them, I guess. I don't know. Like they're just not listened to. Like they're not listened to within their own organizations, and it's a frustrating place to be. And I've been there, and I don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to be there.
I kind of want to go back to the ego thing, but I'm not going to. It's just I have some pretty strong opinions about that. I really do. And so the thing is, all right, I'll say it. So the thing is this, because it just came up again, the not people feeling as if they're not being listened to, or they outright know they're not being listened to. And I think in higher ed, part of the complication is that you have a system set up that's based on the hierarchy of credentials. And because you have the PhDs, and the PhDs kind of look down on the EDDs a little bit, but the PhDs definitely think they're at the top. They think they're at the very top of knowledge and all that other stuff in a lot of cases. I remember, I'll never forget this, that my first job in higher ed, I had not gotten a master's yet. And I remember one of the professors, as a matter of fact, I think he was a marketing professor, but I was a PR. I was really more on the PR side of the house at the time. And I remember he sat down one day and he said, well, what kind of degrees do you have? And I said, I got a bachelor's. He says, oh, well, I have a PhD. And then he went on to tell me his reason for whatever he was telling me. And I said, yeah, but I've also been working in my field for like 20 years.
Right.
So
it's not theoretical.
Yeah, and that did not land well with him. I mean, like no. he looked insulted when I said that, and the only thing I could think was, well, how insulted do you think I feel? Because you just flat out told me that you have a bigger voice than I do in my area because of your credentials in your area, and it doesn't even make sense. So
right, yeah.
Yeah, man.
I did my master's degree for fun. Like I wanted to go back to school and study something cool, and that's what I did. And it was expensive, but I did it for fun. And it's funny because you get a master's degree, you can't even lord it over anyone, right? Like,
yeah, that's the funniest thing. I'll tell talk about something that stings. So literally twice in 1 week. I had two people say, well, an MPS is a BS degree. And I had to go, I got an MPS, right? And they just, and I was just like, no, you already said what you said. So it's fine. But,
and I kind of feel like in higher ed, like if you're offering a BS degree, not a Bachelor of Science, but a degree that's, costing someone, somewhere between 30 and 50K, and it's worthless. You shouldn't be talking about that. Like you should get rid of that degree, because wow, are you like not doing anyone favors?
Well, and the other thing was, I was just like, well, I was like, but how do you even know you haven't done anything? You didn't even get into you didn't even try to do the program. So how would you know? Right. And apparently their thing was, I guess they thought because it's an applied degree, then it is worthless. But to me, the applied degrees are the most valuable ones, because you're actually learning and applying the stuff as you go in your career. And that's what it was designed to do. But let's move on to the new podcast. So I want you to talk about Appendix B, and that's a podcast that you do with your Bravery Media colleague, Kristen Van Dorn. So tell us about it. What are we listening to?
Yeah, so we saw a gap in the higher ed, and I say this like realizing how long this interview has been, this conversation's been, Eddie, but we saw a gap in the higher ed podcast market where there's nothing really short form. So we wanted to do a 10-minute long podcast. And so essentially the concept is Kristen Van Dorn, who's Bravery's head of client strategy and research, and I sit down every week and we have a 10-minute conversation about a topic that we think is pressing in higher ed. And it's really meant to be kind of a glimpse inside the thought processes that happen at our agency and the conversations that we have at our agency. a sort of behind the scenes look, I guess, at how we think through stuff on our own. So it's pretty freewheeling. We've got a lot of different topics. We're 10 weeks in, so I think there's 10 episodes, comes out every Tuesday. And Wednesday comes out every Wednesday. Sorry. Our producer releases it. Comes out every Wednesday, but yeah, we generally record Monday afternoon and it comes out Wednesday morning. And quick little, like I said, 10-minute episode where you can do it. You can listen to it at the gym, you can listen to it on a walk, you can listen to it in your car if it's quick, but pretty fun. I like it. You can search Appendix B wherever. It's on all the podcasting platforms, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I post all the links and some short videos. It's also on YouTube. Does a new video podcasting thing, like a legit video podcasting thing now. So if you go to youtube.com/@braverymedia, you can watch videos if that's your thing. But yeah, Appendix B from Bravery Media.
Outstanding stuff, man. Thank you for a great conversation, Joe. Really, really appreciate it. Joe Goodman, who is the principal and CEO of Bravery Media, co-host of the dearly departed Thought Feeder podcast.
You still find it. It's still out there. I'm leaving it up. I'm leaving it up indefinitely. So it might switch to a new hosting company, but it'll be up indefinitely.
Very cool, Joe. Thank you so much for joining me for our edification.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I appreciate you, and always love having conversations with you. So thanks for having me on.
So I'm going to go ahead and end this on kind of a personal note. So when I recorded this episode of Joel, I was working at an institution that I loved working at, doing work that I absolutely love. I have a thing for higher ed marketing and communications that just won't quit. And so since I recorded that interview, I've left that institution. And it is definitely something that I necessarily wanted. It didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen, but it had to happen. And it had to happen because it got to a point where every day I came home and I had nothing left to give. I had sunken so much energy into that work. Now, you can easily say, well, Eddie, that's your fault. You got to make time for yourself. But let me remind you of something. Remember how during the interview, I mentioned that being on a college campus is like being in a small city? Well, cities don't sleep, right? There's always something going on in the city, even in small towns. They don't necessarily sleep all the time. Stuff happens in the middle of the night that you least expect. And that's what happens on a college campus. As a matter of fact, where I was, twice in 1 week, we had power outages, and they did not happen at convenient times. Let me tell you. Oh yeah, when you work in marketing and communications at a college, you get that phone call at 3 a.m. that something happened with a student. You get that call at 4 a.m. That something is wrong with the website. You have the social media person who's having to adjust their social media schedule. They're basically not really getting a whole lot of rest because social media is going and going and going and going all the time. The communication specialist is getting a phone call from me, the director, saying, hey, listen, I need you to handle this. I know that it's close to midnight, but I need you to handle this because we got to get it done by tomorrow morning, and it just came up 3 hours ago. That is what the work is like. Now, I'm not looking for you to say, oh man, Eddie, you really went through it. That's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for you to understand is that the reason that we do this work is that we believe so much in the missions of these colleges and universities. I work at 3 HBCUs, so there's a huge mission that I believe in. When somebody asked me about the mission of one HBCU where I worked, I said, this mission tells me that this institution is part of the intellectual center of Black America. So what that means, when you take a look at what we do in what we call Marcom, when you take a look at the work that we do, we sink our souls into this thing because we believe so much in it. And you get that smile on your face when a commencement happens and you see these students get their degrees and they turn their tassels and they move on to something else. And then you get an email or a phone call from this alum who says, I remember you when you were at such and such college or such and such university. I want you to know you did something for me. And he's sitting there going, I inspired you? How did I do that? I was working on Twitter. What's the deal? But you never know with these citizens of this small city, these students, you never know what you do that's going to touch their lives. And that's where all that energy comes from. And that's where all that energy goes. So the next time you run into someone and they tell you that they do something related to marketing or communications at a college or a university, I hope that they have your undying respect. Again, many thanks to my man, Joel Goodman, for joining me on this episode of For Our Edification, or at least these 2 episodes of For Our Edification. If you want to hear the past episodes of Thought Feeder, then go to thoughtfeederpod.com. If you want to learn about the work that Joel does at Bravery Media, go to bravery.co. Those links are in the show notes. And again, go check out the past episodes of For Our Edification. All you got to do is go to my website, eddiefrancis.com. Please download the episodes. Get them from your favorite podcast platform, rated, give us comments. We would love to see all of that. Speaking of we, for the very lovely Dr. Halim Malik Francis, I'm Eddie Francis. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of For Our Edification.